นะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะพุทธังธัมมังสังฆังนะมัสสามิ Blessings, good evening. One of the things that attracts many people to the teachings of the Buddha, because they're presented as just teachings that point to the way things are. And they're not presented as sort of being owned by somebody, a god or the gods or the Buddha. It's more just that the Buddha was pointing out the way things are in nature, in life. And for many people they find that quite reassuring, because it's not like you have to believe or give up to a God figure or the Buddha as some kind of special person. It's more just you listen to the words and the teachings and then take them away and see whether it works for you, whether it's true for you. Because the Buddha he noted that every living being, every creature, the human or animal born into the world, he noted that everyone wants happiness, and nobody likes suffering. Nobody wants suffering. Nobody wants pain. That's just the normal way things are. So, for example, any living creature, when confronted with the pain, say, of fire, for example, they shrink away, they move away from fire because it's hot and it hurts you, it burns you. So whether it's ants on the ground near a fire, or a human, or any other kind of animal, when there's a bushfire, say here in Australia we get bushfires, everything tries to get away. Not everyone unfortunately is smart in how to get away. Sometimes koalas go up a tree and then the tree burns and they fall down and die. Or small creatures don't really know what they can do, they just run, but they can't outrun a fire maybe. Some creatures are smart. There was a man I met who was caught in a bushfire, so his only option was to go down to the side of the road to a drainage pipe, which is just big enough for him to squeeze into. So he squeezed in there when the bushfire came through, so he could be away from the fire front. And he squeezed into this drainage pipe under the road and found a wombat there, because wombats also like to go into drainage pipes. And he was face to face with a wombat for about half an hour while the fire went through. And they just tolerated each other because no choice. If you leave the pipe, you die. So the wombat probably didn't want to be with a human either, and the human didn't want to be with a wombat, but better to tolerate the other rather than go and try and be in a fire. And so some animals and humans do work out how to escape danger, but the important point is that we all want to escape from pain, stress, suffering, danger, whether it's mental suffering or physical suffering. It's just intuitive, automatic, you might say. So the Buddha noted that, and out of compassion found a way for anyone, any being, living being, conscious being, to truly escape from suffering. And the Buddha was very thorough in his investigation and understanding. It wasn't as simple as, how to escape the bushfire, go into a drain or something. Although I don't think that's a problem with Buddhist teachings. That may be a Buddhist response to bushfire, is get out of there as quick as you can. But it's only a very small part of dealing with suffering, isn't it? You've still got to deal with the problems of birth, aging, sickness and death. And the Buddha even went a bit further and said, well, actually that's happening life after life, what we call samsara. But he went right into it and got to the point where he said, well, you can actually uproot the very craving and clinging that deludes the human mind and affects the human mind, so that there doesn't have to be any more birth. No more birth means no more suffering. And all his teachings were giving us tools and reflections and ways of practice so that we could deal with the basic causes of our suffering, which is the thing that nobody wants, and that's to develop the Noble Eightfold Path in all its aspects. He gave us these tools, but then he said, well, we have to go off and practice. He couldn't do it for us. He could only show us the way. But because his teachings are so thorough, and we have the whole Tripitaka, what we call the Pali Canon, the Suttas, the Vinaya, the Abhidhamma, we have a whole range of teachings and reflections to use. But even then, it's not enough just to read it and learn it. Some people do that. I knew one monk who just read the entire Buddhist canon, all the volumes of it, from page to page, cover to cover. And he got a lot from it, but he also said at the end, I'm not enlightened just because I read all the Buddhist texts. But it may have given him a good framework for reflecting on truth and training his mind, but it wasn't enough in itself. We also have to practice, put it into practice. Ajahn Chah once said, actually, it's like somebody who just reads the Dhamma, because some people do, they love to read, but that's all they do, they just read and read and read and study. He said it's like a person counting someone else's money. They never go and earn money themselves, they just count someone else's money. They're never going to be able to spend money or do anything themselves because they haven't earned their money yet. So we have to practice. And the Buddha's encouragement was for us to practice. And that's coming from compassion, kindness, the kindness of the Buddha, or the compassion of the Buddha. Knowing that one has to put these teachings into practice to benefit, truly benefit from them. It's the same with, say, the practice of the Brahma Viharas, which I was talking about earlier in the meditation. Metta, goodwill, loving kindness, friendliness, is a quality you have to practice. Everyone might believe it as a good thing. Oh yeah, everyone wants to be happy, free from suffering, everyone needs metta. We can have all the ideals and the thoughts about it, but it's something you also have to practice, because we don't always have metta. These Brahma Viharas can fade very quickly from our mind, from our life. So even developing the simple quality of goodwill is something you have to practice. It's actually a quality the Buddha said practice regularly, over and over again. Do it a lot, because it's such a fundamental part of our practice. It's not the whole of the practice, but it's certainly a huge part of training this mind to go beyond suffering. We have to keep coming back to the basic intention of goodwill, non-anger, non-ill will, and cultivating goodwill. One reason is because out of metta, goodwill, the other three Brahma-viharas, or we say sublime abidings, come. Karuna is a certain side of metta, you might say. It's the will, the intention to free oneself or others from suffering. So it's the opposite of cruelty, hatred. Mudita is the intention for oneself or others to maintain and continue with success and happiness. We translate it as appreciative joy, but it means wishing for that success, happiness that somebody's achieved, just to continue. And they're the opposite of jealousy and envy. And then equanimity, understanding of the law of karma and how that is just a law. That's why they call it a law. It affects us all. And it's just natural that actions rooted in it, unwholesome intentions lead to pain and suffering as a result. Actions with their roots in the intention of that is wholesome, skillful, contribute to happiness as an outcome, as a consequence. And that's just the way it is for whoever, wherever. It's just a law of karma. But reflecting on that, one develops equanimity, a kind of stillness and balance of mind where this is the way it is. Because sometimes we have to receive the fruits of our past karma, negative karma, so it comes up in the form of pain and difficulties and obstacles. Sometimes the fruits of our good past karma. And the same for other people, the people we love, friends, people we know. They also are receiving the fruits of their good and bad karma. And the best quality to deal with that, and the most natural quality to deal with that, you might say, of the natural quality of the well-developed mind coming from metta is equanimity. In the way, say, a parent might care for their child that's sick. The best way to care for that child is to establish the mind in equanimity and say, okay, this has happened. Don't want it. No parent will want their child to be sick or injured. But if it has happened, the best quality of mind to deal with it is equanimity. So equanimity is the opposite of stress and confusion and imbalance and other modern phrases such as losing the plot and so on, where your negative emotions take over the mind and you can't function very well, you can't think straight, you can't do things very well because you're so caught up in your emotions and your reactions, or you've lost the plot. If you lose your equanimity, then you don't function so well. So in the case of a parent looking after their sick or injured child, then instead of caring and doing the right thing for their sick child, they might run around crying and upset and don't know what to do, maybe. Which would be understandable, but it's a loss of equanimity in that situation. Loss of upekkha, Brahma-vihara. So these four Brahma-viharas are all very closely linked. They all really come out of metta. There's kind of different aspects of metta, but with other qualities such as karuna, mudita, upekkha coming in as well. But because everybody has this basic wish to be free from suffering, no one likes pain, no one likes suffering, no one wants it. It's a very natural response for the mind that is on the path of Dhamma to cultivate metta. Cultivating anger, hatred, or dwelling in it just doesn't make sense, does it? It's not good for us and it's not good for others. It really doesn't make sense. When your mind is calm and clear, that realization comes up. Problem is we forget, we get lost. So we lose our metta, we get tired and we get stressed by life and the things that go on around us, dealing with the problems of life, that we forget. We lose our metta. We lose our metta, so then we lose our compassion, our karuna, we lose our mudita, our appreciative joy, and we lose our equanimity, upekkha. So we often make poor choices and make things worse when we lose these qualities. So the Buddha encouraged us to practice them, cultivate them, make them firm, make them strong, make them continuous by regular practice. So they're not just qualities you believe in and say, oh, I think metta is a really good quality, or karuna, compassion, really good quality. Well, okay, that's a good starting point, the ideal, but there are also things we have to cultivate on a daily basis. And we get challenged, don't we? When we do get stressed, they easily fade away from the mind. That's the challenge, is how to maintain these qualities in the different situations we face. When you meet someone who has developed these qualities, the word we use in sort of the way monks talk, we say, oh, they're like a Brahma god. Because one of the karmic results of cultivating any of these 4 Brahma viharas, the dwelling place of Brahma or sublime abidings, is that the mind becomes like the mind of a Brahma god. And if the practitioner has developed or attained any of these 4 Brahma viharas, then when they die, if they haven't reached Nibbana yet, then they may be reborn as a Brahma god. If they've developed a one-pointedness in their practice of goodwill, compassion, appreciative joy, equanimity, then that's a basis for samadhi, jhana, and a basis for rebirth in those realms, which are very pleasant, good places to be, by all description. So they become like a Brahma god, but while you're still alive, the mind can be like a Brahma god when metta is well established. Even though the form is human, the mind might be the mind of a Brahma. Even if it's only for a few minutes or a short period of time, you cultivate any of these 4 qualities, and is bringing your mind to be like the mind of a Brahma god. So the Buddha said, well, who are like Brahmas in the house? Who are like Brahma gods? Well, parents. He was just trying to give us simple reflections that everyone, or most people, can understand. People often dispute and they say, oh, my mum, my dad, they mistreated me, they're like this, they're like that, because lots of people have built up aversion for their parents maybe over time. But it's just a simple truth, isn't it, that when a mum gets pregnant and gives birth, much of the time the mum is like a Brahma god, or dad is. What comes after, yes, sometimes we have our disagreements and problems with parents, of course, but especially in the early part of our life when we're helpless and defenseless, our parents are like Brahma gods. So it's a reflection, isn't it? You bring it up to give yourself an idea of what you're aiming for as you're developing these qualities in your practice, whether it's in a meditation or just a theme for your daily life. The love of a Brahma god, say, or the metta of a Brahma god, the compassion of a Brahma god is kind of automatic, continuous, and has a certain power to it, and it has a certain strong feeling to it. It's something you feel, isn't it? That's why little kids or baby animals run to their parents when they're scared, hungry, whatever. They're drawn by the attractive quality, the attractive power of these Brahma viharas as expressed in the parent. For the one practicing metta, it's also, it brings a sense of responsibility towards others, because the Brahmaviharas we cultivate towards ourselves and then towards all other beings. So cultivating metta, it brings with it a sense of responsibility or caring for, looking after. And that can be a useful quality to develop in our practice, because often you're meeting with obstacles as you train the mind. We talk mostly about the practice of mindfulness, insight. Of course, you might say that's the center of our meditation practice and the Buddhist path. But in order to get to the point where you're developing calm and insight and meditating even, we need to have a certain metta practice and have developed metta to a certain level, just to get to the point where you can have a basic kind of tolerant attitude to the other people around you in life, and even insects or animals or other things as well. It's not always natural for everyone. We tend to, we have the attraction to our parents, say when we're young, and people we might call as friends or relatives. But then a lot of people, most of the people we meet are also strangers or aliens to us. So then the Buddhist practice and the Buddha's teachings are encouraging us to go a bit beyond just the metta we have for ourselves and then our immediate families, but also to go out towards the rest of society. And that's a bit harder, isn't it? Because society is full of different characters and different kinds of people. And that's why metta often needs to be accompanied by equanimity, upekkha, because you meet with different kinds of people in the world and they all have their different karma. Some are more evolved, you might say, in the Dhamma. Some are more evolved in the way of kilesa. Often these two terms are used as sort of opposites. The Dhamma means the way of the truth, or the law of truth, the way things are, and certainly the way of practice that leads to freedom from suffering. We say that's the way of Dhamma, or the mind that sees Dhamma, has the qualities of the Dhamma, then that's the mind of somebody following the path out of suffering. The way of kilesa is the way of suffering, doing things, thinking things, doing things coming from the roots of greed, anger and delusion. So it's the opposite of Dhamma. So you go out into the world, you meet people of all different kinds, don't you? Not just different physical, gender and sort of different social class and different bank accounts, some rich, some poor, different beliefs and so on. But we're talking about Dhamma and kilesa here. Everyone in the world has some Dhamma, some kilesa, but some have more kilesa than Dhamma, some more Dhamma than kilesa. And you have to deal with that. How do you deal with that as you go to work and mix with people who may be not always trustworthy or reliable, or sometimes they have very confusing behavior or very aggressive behavior, say, or competitive behavior? How do you deal with that? Well, when you come back to your sort of root qualities you're developing, well, you use these Brahmaviharas, don't you? Because we have to mix with all kinds of people, and even in ourselves, we mix with different thoughts, don't we? So we are not yet enlightened, so we can't just guarantee, I'll always have good thoughts and be kind and wise and generous and mindful. We have our moments where we are mindful and generous and wise, and then we have our moments when we're not. Because that's our starting point, isn't it? We're not yet enlightened, we're unenlightened, we say. So even we have to develop the Brahmaviharas towards ourselves. How do we deal with ourselves when we have very negative, ugly, unskillful states of mind? Well, the way I would say is to develop with our own unskillful states of mind rooted in kilesa, greed, anger and delusion. Good starting point is cultivating metta. Metta Brahmavihara. And that doesn't mean to say finding excuses for our anger or our greed and selfishness or our fears and worries, but it's treating these with an attitude of goodwill and caring for ourselves as an individual. Almost like, you could say, like a doctor trying to heal somebody, that aiming to heal the disease because it causes pain and suffering. So a doctor will not necessarily like everything about their patient, but they have this basic task to do, which is to find a cure for their illness or injury. So the same for us. We don't like every thought we have. Sometimes we have a lot of self-aversion and really unhappy with the way we're thinking and what's going on in our mind. But the idea is to try and develop the metta so we can find a way through it and a cure, to come out the other side by letting go and developing the mind in a better way. It's interesting, once Ajahn Chah went to the West, when he was I think he was in America, he attended a meditation retreat and led a meditation retreat. And they were doing a program which is nowadays is very kind of normal. When we have meditation retreats, we have a program of sitting and walking meditation. But it wasn't so familiar for Ajahn Chah, my teacher, coming from northeast Thailand 50 years ago. He was not that familiar with a Western style meditation retreat or format. And in the retreat, he was walking around the grounds of the place, the retreat center where he was teaching, and seeing people doing their walking meditation, walking back and forth, back and forth. And of course he knew exactly what they were doing, walking meditation, but he still asked one of the people with him, "Oh, what's going on here?" And they said, "Well, this is the time for walking meditation." They're doing their walking meditation, and I think somebody made the comment that, it looks a bit strange to be people who've never been on a retreat, non-Buddhists. They're not familiar with walking meditation, people mindfully walking back and forth. And the assistant said, "Well, yeah, in the West sometimes I think it's almost like something out of a mental hospital where you have people who are kind of mentally ill walking back and forth doing this strange thing." And Ajahn Chah said, yeah, I understand that, I get that. He said, yeah, well, that's the effect of kilesas on the mind. They're like, they make them, put the mind in ill health, is the term he used. Your mind is ill when you're under the influence of greed, anger or delusion. And so we're trying to cure ourselves as we meditate, develop the Dhamma, understanding of the Dhamma and thereby abandoning the kilesas. It's like we're practicing good mental health, trying to cure ourselves. But the funny thing was, when they had that conversation, then after that, whenever Ajahn Chah saw someone doing their walking meditation, he'd walk up to them and say, "Get well soon." Just wishing people well, to be cured from their mental illness. But really that's what we're doing when we're meditating. We're curing ourselves of mental illness. Sometimes it's very strong, powerful greed, powerful anger, powerful confusion and delusion, or fears and anxieties. A lot of the time it's not so powerful or intense, it's just sort of minor, niggling stuff, you might say small scale kilesa coming up. But either way, these are the effect of kilesa on the mind is defiles the mind, which means brings suffering as a result. What's the opposite? Well, it's the Dhamma. So as you're practicing, you're developing the Dhamma. So just to do that practice of recognizing mental defilements and making the effort to abandon them and cultivate the qualities of the Dhamma and bring them up, has to come up from a place of metta, goodwill, wishing oneself well. Otherwise, one wouldn't do it. Like when people become very depressed or caught in self-aversion, they, instead of trying to practice the Dhamma and develop the Dhamma, sometimes they just go to self-harm or just get stuck in their suffering. So you could say it's one realization one has on the path is just having the sense of metta for oneself, self-love, but not in a way of just trying to boost your ego and impress everyone and be even more selfish than before. Maybe not that. It's just recognizing oneself as a being, a human being, and wishing oneself well, and recognizing that any improvement, bringing up the Dhamma, has to come from the quality of goodwill, metta. It's not going to come from you can't punish yourself to enlightenment, because often when we do recognize greed, anger, delusion, what we call kilesa, we often feel like punishing ourselves, blaming ourselves. I'm no good, too much anger, too much greed. We often make it worse. But to practice the Dhamma, really it has to come from a place of metta, goodwill. Then there's a chance for improvement, learning, improving and changing things for the better. It has to come that way. And then of course other people the same. Whenever you see, you're living with people in the world and you see their bad behavior or come in contact to it, or they actually hurt you in some way, the unenlightened mind's first reaction tends to be one of blaming, wanting to get back at, wanting to punish. But that's suffering on two levels. One, because you're dwelling in anger or aversion, so your own mind is unhappy. Two, it may lead you to do some bad karma by hurting them or following through on your thoughts and actually trying to get them. It's not good, because it leads to more trouble, more suffering. As the Buddha said, anger is never overcome by more anger. It's only overcome by non-anger. So we need to learn how to deal with the people in the world. So metta leads on to upekkha, equanimity. And sometimes you have to just be very equanimous with people who are doing unskillful things around you. And equanimity doesn't mean being passive either. It means you may still have to choose a certain course of action, but you choose that course of action not out of anger or desire to hurt or punish or get back, but out of seeing what is the best thing for you and maybe them in that situation, but not seeking to hurt or punish. So that's obviously a very refined state of mind, equanimity, upekkha. It's the hardest of the Brahmaviharas to develop, because we so easily go into anger when someone's hurt us or hurt our loved ones or caused trouble in a workplace or wherever it is. It's hard to have equanimity, but it's essential to see the value of developing equanimity, to realize that it's good for us and it's good for our goals and what we're trying to achieve by acting out of equanimity rather than out of anger or hatred. So the Brahmaviharas are meditation objects, but they're also themes for daily life, for developing skillful speech, skillful action, relating to society around us. And they all come out of metta. You might say different shades or different aspects of the mind, of just the basic mind of goodwill. And the more you practice them, well, they do develop a certain power or presence in your mind, in your behavior, in your actions and what you do, and a certain good energy, positive energy. May not be limitless, everyone gets tired, so sometimes you have to accept that you need to rest yourself. But that's coming from metta as well, isn't it? In life, everyone has this problem, being burnt out, stretched. So part of metta practice is knowing and doing the right thing for yourself if you are getting burnt out, well, it means maybe you can't help others so much for a while. until you're more rested. At other times, though, you realize you're in a position of strength, or you don't have much suffering, and you maybe can help others who need it more than you. So there's no one simple way here. The way of metta is adaptable as well. You see what's needed in different situations. Having said that, the Buddha also encouraged us to always practice with wisdom. You develop some wisdom and understanding. So, metta, karuna, mudita, upekkha, these four sublime abidings, they're what we call sankharas, they're mental formations. They're accompanied by pleasant feeling, or when perfected, upekkha is neutral feeling. The feeling of, you might say, when it's perfected, the fourth jhana, complete equanimity of mind. But on a more practical basis, daily basis, it's developing, they're accompanied by a good feeling. And to keep developing that, sustaining that more, but then to reflect, well, this feeling, this thought, this feeling is still impermanent. It comes and goes. To observe that, to be, to know that, and that brings you wisdom. When you know the thought of metta can fade, it puts you on guard, doesn't it? It makes you heedful because you know, oh, metta is still something, a quality that's sometimes stronger in my mind, or sometimes disappears, replaced by anger or irritation maybe. Knowing that fact that metta is impermanent and reflecting on it, well, you learn from it even when your metta disappears. It can teach you something. You go, oh, yeah, metta is impermanent. You obviously have to be on your guard, because when you lose your metta, you're more likely to do something unskillful, say something that hurts others, do something that hurts others or yourself. And they have that saying, one momentary loss of metta and you can destroy a life of goodness. You can destroy someone else's life, your own life, do some harsh act or aggressive act, say some words, and everything is destroyed in just a few moments of when you lose your metta. So when you notice metta fading because it's impermanent, it's a quality of mind that comes and goes. When you notice that, then not to, to respond wisely, to be careful, maybe sometimes to limit your action and what you're doing, not to take on too much when you're tired or when you're ill or when you're under pressure and you notice the metta fading. So it's a reflection, isn't it? You have to bring that into your practice of metta as well, to know it's an impermanent quality of mind that sometimes you have a lot of, sometimes a little of. Our screen is also impermanent. I've lost I can't see anyone. Hopefully you can still see and hear me, but I can't see and hear you, so I can't be sure about that. I'll carry on talking to a blank screen for a while. And if you can hear me, well, this is just proof that things are impermanent. There's a reflection on the wholesome dhammas, the wholesome karma that we develop, that's also impermanent, and what's impermanent is not self. Because ultimately, our aim in the practice is not to develop, to be a Brahma God, because Brahma gods are still subject to birth and death. So the Buddha didn't, he recognized the goodness of a Brahma God, somebody who's developed a lot of kindness, compassion. But he said, practice for the deathless, it's higher, it's better, nibbana. The only way to do that is to recognize even these qualities are not self. So rather than, say, building a self of metta, but to recognize these are qualities that sustain the mind, they're part of the path, but to also realize that they're impermanent, unsatisfactory in themselves, not self. To practice vipassana, direct the mind to reflect on that. So your metta doesn't become a cause of suffering, say at times when it does fade. To act wisely in those situations when you're short of metta, okay, well, take more rest, be more careful, go away on your own for a while maybe. Do things that will protect yourself when you're very physically or mentally drained, perhaps. Or when you're losing your equanimity. You have everyone in the course of your practice, you have to learn how much you can take. Because all kinds of things challenge us, don't they? Like equanimity is hard to maintain when you're with people who don't like you, or situations that are painful, difficult to be with. The first thing that disappears is equanimity. So you have to be alert to that, to know, equanimity is still a state of mind that can fade, still impermanent. Doesn't mean to say you give up and just say, I can't practice equanimity anymore, but you have to be more on your guard in those situations where you're challenged, you're tempted to become unbalanced by maybe the words of other people or the behavior of other people, is a common one. Or just in the face of difficulties, when you meet with difficulties yourself, you have to be aware, my equanimity may fade here, I better be careful and maybe put more effort into cultivating or preserving your equanimity in different situations. So I always find it inspiring living with monks, particularly monks who have lived a long time, practiced the holy life for many years, because generally they've developed a lot of equanimity towards the difficulties of life, particularly the difficulties of old age, sickness, facing death, the ups and downs of life. They tend to meet with a lot of equanimity. So, you go and see someone who's been a monk for 30, 40, 50 years, maybe on their birthday, you say, happy birthday, and they just say, yeah, but it just means I'm 1 year closer to my death. Or you go and visit them when they're sick, and they say, yeah, bodies are like that, bodies get sick, bodies have this problem, bodies have that problem, but they're not too bothered by it because they developed strong equanimity and they just know human beings get sick, human beings get old. Or, sometimes when there's some kind of misunderstanding and someone doesn't like them, you go and visit that monk and they say, this person, they don't really like me, that's the way it is. Some people like you, some don't. Because that's the nature of life. You'll never get people liking you all the time. Some people will, some won't. Some people will like you some of the time, and sometimes some of the time they won't like you. That's life. But try and maintain the equanimity through it. So the Brahmaviharas still lead on to the development of insight into impermanence, unsatisfactoriness, not self. And that can inform the way we practice them in daily life as well. So tonight, just giving you a few reflections on the practice of metta, Brahmavihara, but also the role of the Brahmaviharas in the Noble Eightfold Path. Maybe I'll just say that much for now, and the last part of our session we can use if anyone has any questions. I'll try to answer them for you.